The person who hurt you isn't sleeping as peacefully as they want you to think. Here's the truth they'll never say out loud. When someone wrongs a person who genuinely cared for them, something stays. Not guilt exactly, something quieter, something they can't shake loose no matter how many distractions they pile on top of it. You weren't strategic. You weren't running a calculation in the background. You didn't measure what you gave against what you received. You just showed up fully, consistently, without a hidden agenda. And that kind of love is not common. Most people have never experienced it. Most people have only ever been loved by someone who was keeping a mental ledger, someone who withdrew warmth when they felt threatened, someone who competed rather than connected. But you weren't doing any of that. You were just real. And real, in a world full of performance, is jarring. They didn't recognize it at first. Genuine care can look ordinary when you're surrounded by noise. Your patience didn't announce itself. Your loyalty didn't wave a flag. It just was, steady, present. And they got comfortable inside that steadiness without ever stopping to understand how rare it actually was. In this video, we're going to explore why betraying someone with an honest heart doesn't dissolve with time, why it actually grows heavier the further they get from the moment they made that choice, and why your healing, your silence, your quiet rebuilding is the most powerful thing they will ever witness from a distance. Stay with me. If you've ever been the one who loved without games, this is going to resonate somewhere deep. Part 1. What they actually broke. It wasn't just a relationship they ended. Let's be precise about that, because there's a difference between losing someone who loved you casually and losing someone who was devoted to your actual becoming. You remembered the things that mattered to them, not because you were trying to impress them, because you genuinely cared about who they were. You noticed the small shifts in their mood. You were in their corner in conversations they never even knew about. That's not a habit, that's a rare form of emotional investment. And here's the thing about people who have never healed the wounded parts of themselves. They don't know how to receive that kind of care without misreading it. They interpret your softness as a vulnerability they can afford to test. They see your forgiveness as an endless resource. They mistake your consistency for something that requires no maintenance, until the day they go too far. Whatever the specific moment was, whether it was dishonesty or absence or choosing someone else's momentary attention over years of your loyalty, the fundamental thing they fractured wasn't just your trust. It was the rarest version of love, the kind that asks for nothing, the kind that sees clearly and stays anyway. Betraying someone who loved you purely isn't a mistake. It's a revelation of readiness. And here's what they couldn't have known they were doing in that moment. When you hurt someone who loved you at the surface, they leave and eventually forget. But when you hurt someone who loved you at the core, you carry the shape of it, because deep inside, they know your love was not a performance. They know you would have remained through difficulty. They know you were not already scanning for exits, and knowing that, while standing in the ruins of what they chose to do, creates a weight that doesn't lift easily. Part 2. The silence between distractions. Right after it happens, they go into management mode. They spin a story that lets them breathe. They tell themselves it was complicated. They say you were too much, too intense, too expectant. They need the narrative to be survivable, so they reshape it until it is. New people arrive. New conversations fill the space. The noise works for a while, but silence always comes back. It arrives in the strangest moments. A melody they forgot they associated with you. A phrase someone says that sounds like something you used to say. A smell, a season, a color that pulls the memory forward without warning. And suddenly it isn't the story they constructed that they're living inside. It's the actual one. They remember how you looked at them, not with suspicion or scorekeeping, with belief. You believed in the version of them they were still working toward. You gave that freely, without being asked, without making them earn it daily. That's the specific thing they cannot replace, because attention is everywhere, excitement is cheap, but someone who genuinely believed in who you were trying to become, that doesn't appear again by swiping right or staying busy. They begin to see the difference between novelty and depth, between someone who finds them interesting and someone who found them worth protecting. And the comparison is not kind to anything that came after you. What truly haunts someone isn't the person they lost. It's the specific quality of love they chose to throw away. Whispers are more durable than shouts, and this one will keep whispering. Part 3. Why there's no comfortable story to hide inside. When someone betrays a person who treated them poorly, there's material to justify it. When someone leaves a distant or unavailable partner, incompatibility becomes a sufficient explanation. But when someone betrays a person who was genuinely, quietly devoted to them, there's no clean narrative available. They try, naturally. They reach for every available frame. You were too sensitive. You expected too much. You couldn't handle their complexity. But none of it fully sticks, because beneath the constructed version, the actual version is sitting there, unmoving. You weren't controlling. You weren't demanding. You were honest. And honesty has no comfortable villain arc. Here's what they lost beyond you as a person. They lost a space where they didn't have to perform, where their actual self, including the uncertain, unpolished, still becoming parts, was welcomed. They could fail without being punished. They could be honest without being weaponized. They could show weakness without losing standing. Now every relationship carries that performance pressure, and they feel it as absence, not of you specifically, but of what being known felt like. Every time someone they care about questions them, pulls away from them, or makes their worth conditional, they remember what unconditional felt like. And they remember who was offering it. That is what haunts them, not guilt in dramatic waves. Comparison, quiet, the relentless comparison. You can move on from losing someone. It's much harder to move on from choosing to break them. And the deepest layer, they know you didn't manufacture that betrayal. They know you didn't create a situation that forced their hand. They made a choice. And choices, unlike accidents, carry full ownership. That's the part that stays. Part 4, time does not do what they expected. People hold on to the idea that time heals everything, and sometimes it does. But healing through time requires that something mutual was lost. When one person chose to end something that the other person was still fully committed to, time doesn't erase the memory, it educates it. In the first phase, relief shows up. No more accountability, no more facing what they did, no more being in proximity to someone who knew what they had chosen. Now relief feels like freedom until it doesn't. Then life provides contrast lessons. People who love conditionally, people who disappear when the circumstances get inconvenient, people who turn loyalty into currency. And each of those experiences quietly calculates against the memory of how you loved. They start to understand, in a vocabulary they didn't have before, what emotional safety actually means. What it meant that you didn't embarrass them, that you handled conflict without turning it into ammunition, that you protected them in rooms they weren't present in. None of that was invisible, it was just unappreciated in real time. Time teaches them the word for what they had, and then shows them, through every subsequent experience, just how rarely that word applies. What they called ordinary becomes recognizable as exceptional only once it's gone and being measured against everything that followed. They won't always say your name. They might never admit regret to anyone who could pass it along. But in private moments, in honest flashes, when someone gives them the least version of what you gave fully, the thought appears, and it doesn't need to be spoken to be felt completely. They didn't just lose a relationship, they lost a standard. And living below a standard you once had access to is its own form of consequence. Part 5. The thing they cannot prepare for. Here is the final layer. What truly settles into them over years is not that you're absent, it's how you left. You didn't broadcast what they did. You didn't make their choices into public property. You didn't try to undo them or punish them or drag their name. You simply removed yourself and began rebuilding. That matters more than they expected, because when someone betrayed stays furious, the person who caused it can call them unstable. When someone betrayed keeps reaching back, the person who caused it can call them desperate. But when someone betrayed simply gets quiet, heals, and starts thriving, there is no story available to make that comfortable. Your growth becomes the evidence. Your peace becomes the proof. Your silence becomes a mirror they can't look away from, not because you positioned it that way, but because truth, when lived out loud through a person's life, is unavoidable. And somewhere, in a quiet room, on an ordinary day, they face the full weight of a simple thought. If they had simply protected what you offered, you would have protected them through everything. Your loyalty was not seasonal. Your care was not a negotiation. It was real. And real things, once broken, do not return to be broken again. So as they carry that weight, you are doing something far more important. You are directing the same quality of love that they couldn't hold properly back toward yourself, toward your own life, toward people and experiences capable of receiving it without wasting it. Their consequence is living with the knowing. Your reward is living with the growing. If you have a good heart, hear this clearly. Their inability to value it was never proof that your love was misplaced. It was proof that they had not arrived at a place where they could hold something real without flinching. Don't let their unreadiness make you smaller. Don't let their failure teach your heart to close. The world needs people who love without strategy, people who show up without a hidden calculation running in the background, people who choose sincerity even when it costs something. One day someone will receive what you offer with the fullness it deserves. And when that day arrives, you will understand with clarity why this chapter ended exactly when it did. If this reached something real in you, take a moment to like this video. It helps Psychology Wisdom keep creating content like this for people who lead with their hearts. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that loving honestly was never the mistake, their loss, your strength. Brave hearts do not lose in the end. They simply take longer to find where they belong.